So I'm going to talk to you about a bit of a change in our workforce over the last little bit. And just to give you a bit of a background on myself, um, I've been in the tech space since about 1988. And one of the things I like to talk about is the fact that when I first was working with British Telecom, we were doing data over voice as opposed to voice over data. So you connect a telephone call and then be able to send somebody a file. So I go back that far. Um, but one thing that is evident to me is that nothing could have prepared us for what we've seen over the last 5 weeks. And it's certainly been a shift globally for everybody. And we talk to customers very much on an international basis, as you saw from the first slide that I had up. We're a global organization in terms of our customer base, and everybody has very much the same story to tell in regard to where they've been at. Previously this was an in-person event. And previously as well, we have a new acronym, BC, which is before COVID. Microsoft was very aggressive about trying to promote the use of Teams. Largely, that was driven by the fact that Skype is now has an official sunset upon it, as well as the capabilities that it brings to bear for their customers. And they believe it's the best front end platform to aggregate a number of different things, as Joel and Ron were talking about at the beginning of the call, but nothing did anything like this, which is it only takes a pandemic to really drive that adoption. I think you saw the numbers in March, where they had a daily active use jump of 50%. So it's been a massive uptake. I often also speak after David, and I love it because he really sets up the whole concept of digital transfer, or of adoption and change management, or organizational change management. And really where we come in is, how do we measure that? Frankly, as an organization, we really rarely get involved in customers unless they have a project afoot. So you really have to have something that you want to measure. And to that end, we get a number of questions from leadership, like how are we digitally transformed right now? There's a whole raft of this buzzword around digital transformation or adoption. I'll dive deeper into those in a bit. And what does that really mean from an empirical perspective? But in the last 5 weeks now, we had this question, which was really, hello, is this thing working? It was very, very interesting to see kind of the change in questions that our customers were having. So we're kind of moving along as we all have normally done. And kind of the compelling event that we saw was the NBA canceling their season, and it was just a domino effect of every sports franchise, or not franchise, but sports leagues doing a similar thing. By the 13th, I mean, we had pretty much come to an all stop. There was a mass shift in people working from home, and then we got a bunch of it was very interesting because this came from not just North America, but the 3 other continents that we service. Who's using Teams and who is struggling? So that was the first wave of questions. And then within a week, those questions started to change. Now that we have kind of the lights on and we can see some people, what are they saying and how are they feeling? And then the next thing that will happen is these questions will change over time. Now, this isn't completely obviously the use case is completely abnormal, but but from an adoption change management perspective, these types of things are reasonably normal, in that based on your maturity. And I heard at the top of the call all the different sets of maturity. We're planning for teams, we're in the midst of deploying teams, we're deploying teams rapidly, or we've had teams in place since 2016, and we're one of the first adopters, and we've been at it for a long time. Based on those maturity vectors, you're going to have different questions of your data. And so, nothing was more stark than what we saw. One of the kind of catchphrases we like to use is, we like to plan for the data that you haven't, or for questions that you haven't been asked yet. So a couple of things that we did that that is not my dog, but it could be. So if you hear one in the background soon, that may happen.
He really agrees with your message too.
It's awesome. So, so we created a couple of quick response videos. One was measuring teams from people working from home, and the other one was analyzing via by keyword analysis. So, one of the things I'd also like to do is talk a little bit about what Microsoft ships versus some of the things that we do, because they do have some good tools, and it depends on where you are in your adoption cycle, what you're looking to measure, as to the appropriateness of the tools. Not everybody needs tyGraph as an example, and not everybody can use what it ships out of the box. So what we're going to do is kind of compare what Microsoft ships out of the box compared to what tyGraph does in the context of these two questions, because that'll allow us to distill down to, you know, from a functionality point of view, how can we get at these answers? And so those are the two questions we'll be asking. The other thing I'd like to talk a little bit about, or just from a level set point of view, talk a little bit about the difference between reporting and analytics. So reporting, think about it as, you know, it's always easiest to relate to something everybody knows, which is your financial statement. So you have an income statement, a balance sheet, and maybe expense reports and things of those that you would expect to get on a regular basis in a business. So then you also think about Office 365 and what are the things that you use to measure your Microsoft 365 environment, and specifically in today's topic of Teams. And then the other side of that coin is analytics. So, you know, analytics are for the scenarios where you can't really predict what you're going to be asked. So if you look at financial scenarios, oftentimes when you run into an analytics solution or problem, you go to your data source, you rip stuff out, you put it into Excel or some other manipulation tool, Power BI, hopefully, and then you're able to, you know, kind of dig down into that data and get your answers. So there is a case for both of these, where, you know, sometimes you just need the reports, you just need the telemetry. How are we doing? Are the lights on? You know, are we continuing to progress in the eye that we had hoped to? And then analytics are for when something goes a little bit offside, or we need to ask more questions of our data, the ability to do that. So there's three methods to collect data from the Microsoft 365 system. The first is the admin center. So I'm just going to PowerPoint these. The rest I'll show you as live demonstrations. And the admin center allows you to go and collect some telemetry data. So you can see you have the various workloads here, Teams being one of them. And then when you're inside of a particular workload, you can see kind of the 7, 30, 90, 180 day events. You can export this data with some limitations. And you can get a little bit of information about what's going on in the tenant space. You obviously either have to be have the reporting credentials, or sorry, the security value of a reporter, or be an admin within the tenant space. And the larger your organization, the harder that is to be able to disseminate this information out to different individuals. The other thing that's really important in regard to any type of adoption analysis is the concept of your time dimensions. Because when you're measuring adoption, it's really important to have kind of standardized times. I can look at rolling 30 days. I can look at, you know, month to month. I can look at, you know, 90 days, whatever that dimension is. You want to make sure that you're measuring it based on consistent form factor. So out of the box, you get 7, either 28 or 30 days, depending on your lens into it, or 90, 180, and then as you get down, some of that data goes away. So you're going to need a way to capture that data if you want to go to a year-over-year reporting. I guess we compare that to what we were looking to do sort of at the end of March, beginning of April timeframe. You know, our window was completely shrunk. So we're looking at a very small time frame to really start getting some of these measurements. You can export data, as I mentioned before, from the admin center. It dumps out into an Excel spreadsheet. You'll notice that no user information is exported from this. So it's limited in what it can do. And then there's all the whole GDPR aspects, which I'll cover off in a bit as well. Then the next piece of the next tool that Microsoft provides is something called Usage Analytics. It used to be Adoption Analytics previously. It has been rebranded. So for those of you who may be familiar with the older version, this is a Power BI template. And again, you need somebody, one person who's at least has the reporter role in the admin center to be able to download this, and then they can build reports and disseminate information out to other users based on that. So I'll go into this in a bit because I'll show it to you in real time. And then again, the whole concept of usage here. So when we're looking at usage, it's, you know, the concept that is used by Microsoft is monthly active usage. So it's that MAU score, and there, you know, there's no concept of kind of a daily active usage. It is done on a monthly basis, and then you can see it by the different telemetry options. So, you know, you can tell whether you're going up or going down. But beyond that, it gets fairly limited. So I'm going to jump over here into a demo now. So I talked about the Microsoft Usage Analytics. If you're seeing this report, you've got the old one. So I just wanted to jump over here and point that out to you. There is a new, much prettier report that they've put together. And it's also got a lot more functionality to it as well. So again, there's an executive summary looking at the various workloads. You can see Teams here has 8 users and 36% engagement. And the ability to go in and take a look at some of these other charts. So I can look at, from an adoption perspective, the various months. So if I want to look at April, I can see enabled users, month-over-month returning users, and the various breakdowns. And there are different measures in here that you'll be interested in. We can look at licensing. We can look at product usage. Again, we've got Teams over to the far right, taking a look at what you can see from a channel and user perspective, chat messages, meeting participation. So it gives you a kind of a flavor as to what's going on from a product perspective. And then it breaks it down into the user perspective. So each of the various users and their activity in that particular time frame. So so this gives you some good information on what's going on. However, going back to the questions which were posed, which is how are the teams that sorry, how active were our teams, kind of who's connected and who isn't, and then kind of from a keyword analysis point of view, you can see really what we have here is some telemetry type of information. So what I did is I adjusted this report and I put a filter on it, and I can say, okay, let's go look at everything that has happened on or after March 1. So that will give me this data, but you start to see the limitations when you say, well, show me everything that's happened in the last 20 days. You'll see you have no data. And the reason is that user data is only updated once per month. So from a telemetry perspective, it's great. But if we've got a bit of a situation on our hands here and we're trying to really understand what's going on a day-to-day activity basis, this report, even though it's showing as updated as of today, does not bring in that type of granular level data. So this is the point typically when people start Googling for analytics Office 365, and hopefully they land on tyGraph. There are others in the market. And so let me just, first of all, give you kind of a broad perspective on what tyGraph will provide you with. I talked a little bit about the digital transformation concept. So we start with a digital transformation scorecard. Though people have talked about digital transformation, it's hard to really put empirical numbers against it. So we've taken a shot at that. And the concept here is to kind of downplay the email side of things, because if we start measuring Office 365 traffic, you'll find that a lot of it will be in email still. And then start encouraging people or scoring them higher if they're using more working out loud type of platforms like a SharePoint or a OneDrive. And if they're truly working out loud using things like a Teams or a Yammer, where they're collaborating openly, then we'll score them with a higher score. So it's a 1, 3, 5 weighting system. 1 if you're just using email, 3 if you're using SharePoint and OneDrive, and then 5 if you're using like a Teams or a Yammer. And the other part of this is that we will overlay this over time. So we take a look at every signal every day for every user. So we pull all that down and then we aggregate it up over time. So we start to see some interesting things. One is that we might have a downtick in Skype and an uptick in Teams, which is probably appropriate given that we're trying to transform people off of one platform and onto another. So back to that whole adoption story, right now I'm looking at a 12-month period so I can get a really holistic view over a period of time. But I'm also not losing users. I'm having them transform from one platform to another. So we've seen a few things happen over the last 3 to 5 weeks. We've seen a hockey stick. I'm a Canadian, so I'll use that expression. Hockey stick spike in Teams usage, but also in Yammer usage. It's another kind of unsung hero. So Teams kind of for that local collaboration space, your groups of 50 or so, but Yammer, sort of, especially in these larger global organizations, has also seen a real uptick in usage. We're also seeing increases in SharePoint and OneDrive. Why? Because people have realized that those local file shares are no longer pretty valuable anymore. So we're looking at that type of thing. Again, I can scope this down to say the last 90 days, and then drill down to see. Well, maybe we'll do a different factor here, the last 30 days. So we can see weekends, and then we can see kind of that biorhythm of what's going on. And you will see things like, your teams increasing over these periods of times, and in relative proportion to, say, some of the other workloads. So that's one way to break down your usage patterns. Another way is to take a look, kind of by department. If department is an appropriate slicing vector, we do provide all the other HR dimensions that we can pull from Azure Active Directory or from an extract from your HR system. So location, job title, department, division, all the usual suspects that you would have. You can break down your workloads. And then finally, from a license adoption perspective, with specifically around Teams, we can take a look at who's using Teams, and I can flip this upside down and look at the white space and see who isn't, and then take a look at this kind of in concert with the other different workloads. So if somebody's using a SharePoint or a OneDrive or a Yammer, I'm probably going to target them to try and get them onto Teams, because they've exhibited some behavior patterns that would tell me that they're probably eligible, or not eligible, but capable of making that switch fairly easily. I can break this down by my E3 and say E5 licenses, so I can see those people that have been assigned a license and whether or not they've actually been using it. Again, time sliced to a particular period. So now let's get into something that that answers the first question, kind of, is it turned on? So we created very quickly this engagement churn report. And what we were looking for is, in the last 30 days, tell me all the users we gained in Teams and tell me all the users we lost in Teams. So what we did was we looked at, if we were looking at the last 30 days, we could do this for 60 or 90. Users gained, well, that's probably something that's good and interesting, and I may want to create a communication to all those people. Hey, welcome to Teams, and invoke all the change management architecture that David was speaking to. However, these are the people that I'm really worried about. So these are the people that previously had been using Teams. They shifted to work from home, and now we've lost them. So these are the 157 sheep, if you will, that I need to bring back into the fold. So is there a problem because previously they had been using Teams and now they're not? Then those are the ones I'm going to pay some attention to. And then finally, unengaged members. So these are people that had never used Teams, they're still not using Teams, and they may be a target from an adoption change management perspective. But certainly these two, users gained and users lost, are the ones I want to focus most on. So that was one set of reports. And so you can see there are, the third way of collecting this data is going to Microsoft Graph to go and get it. And you can write some PowerShell script to go and collect this data. But I would caution you that it's not for the faint of heart. There's a fair bit of effort that's required to be able to do that. So from usage adoption, you're not going to be able to do this type of thing. From the graph, you can, and it comes with some caveats in terms of setup and so forth. So the next set of questions that we got asked was around keyword analysis. Now, my data set is BC, so before COVID. So the term COVID didn't exist. So what I've done is I've just used something that was in my data set, which is services. So I've pulled out the word services, and you can do a little word cloud here, and see all of the words that were surrounding services. And this is I'd argue entertaining, but perhaps maybe not too informative. What really becomes interesting is when these words started entering the lexicon for an organization. And so we saw a lot of organizations where COVID wasn't even mentioned until, say, March 1. And then we started to see a spike of that word, and we can see it geographically. So so if we can take a look at a particular country, we can see where that word was used, or we can do this by other dimensions. So organization, business unit, department are just some things that we've thrown up as examples. Again, with the ability to filter by any dimension. The other thing that we scored this with is a sentiment analysis. So the way this works is that we're taking every message, we're sending it out to Microsoft Cognitive Services. It's returning a score to us, 1 being the most positive and 0 being the most negative, with 0.5 being neutral, not really sure whether it's positive or negative. And so we can take the word, and it's not just the word COVID, but we would also do things like coronavirus, work from home, quarantine, etc. And we're doing analysis of these words across the organization and plotting them with the sentiment score from that metric, and allowing us to really kind of understand the vibe of the organization. So most managers will, if they want to understand how their employees are feeling, they will walk around the office. Well, when you can't walk around the office anymore, you can certainly get people on Skype chats or Teams chats rather, and those types of things to pull them together, and it's definitely a best practice to do that. But another signal may be taking a look at the words people are using in the context of how they're using those words, and again, by department, by business unit, and so forth. And you can really start to build some inferences into the data that you're analyzing. Other ways of measuring, again, this is analogous to some of the things. I'll just break this out to a larger time period so we can see some trending over time. Analogous to some of the usage and adoption reports, this is one of the graphs that Joel had shown. It was specifically branded to Perficient, but we can brand to any company's color palette. But really kind of understanding how things are trending over time. Then we start getting a little bit deeper into the usage of teams and channels. So, I want to understand, from a team and channel perspective, how this particular team is functioning. And again, I can sort this by team or channel, or I can also pull out one of my other HR directives. But this gives me a kind of a heat map. We developed this concept of a measure of active engagement. It's used in a number of different contexts. The context here is understanding just on aggregate how active, how busy that team is. And you can see other things like, what's behind the tabs in these teams. So how many messages, average messages per day, things of that nature. So from an engagement perspective, I can also see who the team owners are with little hyperlink or hyperlink messages to be able to jump over to email. Who's getting @mentioned a lot? So this is one of the signals for change champions. If somebody is being @mentioned frequently, they're often being sought out for knowledge, or one of those knowledge workers that are that could be of value from a change champion perspective, and I'll highlight that as well in a minute. And then finally, if we flip this on its head, here are all the teams that have absolutely no activity associated to them and could be candidates for deletion. The next one is member interaction. Again, this became a lot more important in the last few weeks as we're not able to see how people are interacting. We've got a bit of a heat map here in regard to the interactivity between certain individuals. So Scott and Fernando seem to work quite a bit together. Matteo and Scott are also working a lot together, and the other ones just kind of a bit of a disparate amount of work. If I extend this out, say over the last 12 months, we can see a bit of a different scenario, and then we could play this out over time. So let me just pause this. Go back to an interesting spot. So we can see market, support, project management. What we're doing is we're taking a look at the activity within that team over a period of time, and often teams and channels are appropriately named to the purpose that they serve. So you can see, for example, I'll lay it back into our own environment. We use Teams extensively for product development. So we can actually map ship cycles to the amount of team activity. If our tyGraph for Teams product is going out the door, we'll see a huge amount of activity around it, and it'll drop off, and then we'll take a look at a tyGraph for SharePoint or one of the other products that we have, and we'll see massive amounts of activity as it is hitting its ship cycle. Another way we have of measuring interaction is this node diagram. And again, looking at what we call the hidden network, the previous meaning of that was to take a look at, you have an org chart and you expect people to, kind of work in certain ways. But the reality is there's cross department, there's all sorts of other functionality. And what we've done is we've mapped this out for you to kind of take a look at how people are interacting, and are there outliers from your network relative to some of the other more intensive communication channels? Is there somebody being kind of a bottleneck to communications? Does everything route through one individual person? So again, a different way of looking at things. We can do this by team, or we can look at a specific channel to see how people are behaving within this. When we described this as hidden network, again, it was pre-COVID. Now you truly have a hidden network in that people that are working from home, it's hard to really understand how they're interacting. This is another way of doing it. And then finally, SharePoint activity, or sorry, sentiment tracking. Looking at different sentiment scores over time. So I'd already described how sentiment tracking works. What we found to be a powerful signal is the ability to take this and aggregate it over time. So if you look at each individual message and how it was scored and the fault tolerance available from the Microsoft Cognitive Services ML engine, each one it may be a little bit off, but on aggregate over time, it tells really interesting stories. So we can go take a look at a particular team and see, this one might be trending down slightly, but there's some, real spikes and valleys and amplitude. So we can do this at a team level. We can take a look at a particular department, or we can look at a geography as an example. And then finally, SharePoint Activity. Because SharePoint is integrated with Teams from a storage container perspective, we also find it's important to understand not just Teams and channels and messages and meetings and things of that nature, but also what type of file activity is going on. So in this case, we're scoped down to a specific team, but we can take a look at that file activity. We can pace it out over a particular time. This is our SharePoint product. I just want to show this in the context of Teams. So we have these. We have two ways of looking at it. Show me all of my SharePoint groups that have Teams associated to them, and we can do that. We can pivot on the association, and then we can take a look at activity based on pages, users, etc., as well as file activity. But the point being is that Teams is not an isolated product, and you're going to want to be able to measure other things that are inside of Teams that may not necessarily be surfaced right in Teams. And then finally, the other thing that is important is this concept of influencers. So when we first started doing analytics about 6 years ago, we used to think that an influencer was somebody who posted a lot and was, had a high level of activity. But we quickly came to realize that, if that were true, then a bot would be an influencer in your network, and that's hardly the case. So what we started to do is take a look at the different measures for a particular user. And this is a quick breakdown as to how it works. We look at how much they're contributing from a volume perspective, and we give them points. What the impact of that is, meaning that how many people are responding, what type of reactions are they getting? Is their message turning into a thread? Is that thread getting lots of participants into it? The breadth at which they're posting. So how many teams and channels are they posting in, or is it one or is it many? And then finally the reach and how many people they're interacting with. Think the node diagram in that context. So this gives you a quick way to pull out. I mean, as Ron was saying, deploying to an 80,000 person network, how do I go and identify all of those champions in my network really quickly? The influencer score is designed specifically for that. We also have other ideas here where it may be interesting for you to understand time of day. So when are people posting, and what does that activity level look like? So we can take your messages and just flip them a little and aggregate them in a way so that you can understand, from a UTC time perspective, what the peak times are that people are using the system. I think for those of you who found that everything I showed you at a detailed employee level may have creeped you out, we also have the GDPR version of this, which is fully obfuscated, whereby we will remove all of the, in this case, the mugshot for the user. The username gets replaced by a nonsensical user number, and then the email address is removed from this. So there are different ways to obfuscate information. You can opt people out completely. So this is often the case where we may have users from Germany, France, Austria, where their works councils have said, you're not allowed to collect any data, so we can opt people out, or we can obfuscate the data so that you would not have that information. What we've seen, though, is that this isn't a big brother solution. What we're really looking at from an organizational perspective is understanding kind of, who needs to be helped and how can we help them. And frankly, from an influencer perspective, who can go and help those people? Because at scale, you're going to need to rely on, not just one or two people in a communications department or an HR department or your project management or change management department. You're going to need to rely on a lot of individuals to help you through that. Just a couple of things. One is everything I've shown you so far without some of the customizations is available in App Source. You can go and download these Power BI models. We also, on our website, if you drill through on each one of the products, you can see a description. And then finally, we also have a kind of HTML version of this where we're using Power BI embedded to show you how to provide this without requiring a Power BI license to be able to use the solution. The other thing to mention, there's my son doing his thing. The other thing to mention is this is deployed in two formats. I'll just quickly do this. So if you want to use our SaaS service, it's literally a mouse click off our website to get set up. We collect the data for you, we store it, and then we provide it to you in Power BI. But for those of you where data sensitivity is a very big thing, not that we handle data incorrectly, but where data sensitivity is such that you can never have it leave your tenant space, we can also deploy this into your tenant space. There's setup involved in this, obviously, so it's a little bit more of a work effort to get going relative to the SaaS service, but both are equally capable. Finally, and this I'm not going to unpack, I just left it in the PowerPoint deck for your purposes, but comparing tyGraph to Microsoft Usage Analytics, kind of some cautionary notes in regard to building it yourself. Not completely discouraging it, but just understand that things like throttling, data capacity, optimizing your Power BI model, these are all real things that you want to consider as part of it. I've also included some pricing because I find that these presentations, if you don't know what it costs, prices is one of the important things of any decision. So our price is around 8 cents per user per workload per month, with minimum charge of $250 per month under 3,000 users. We have a discounting schedule over 10,000 users. I'll just go back into broadcast mode so you can see that a little bit more clearly. So at 25,000 users, 10% discount. At 50,000 users, 20% discount, and so forth. So depending on the size of your organization. We also have an enterprise version where we bundle everything that we ship as one price, and we include future enhancements to that as well. So if we roll new products in the future, they get included with our enterprise price. And round numbers, it's around 2 times or 2 workloads. Anytime you get over 2 SKUs, so let's say I want Teams and SharePoint, then it makes sense to purchase our enterprise price. And with that, I will stop, and I am at time. I can take questions. Joel?